playing with narrative time has long been a staple in narrative. The idea of flashbacks as a basic form of this has existed for a very long time. However, truly playing around with time and distorting it is a little more recent. The most typical example, which is most pertinent to the game I will discuss today, is Groundhog Day. The idea of repeating a single day or single event over and over again is quite the nightmare scenario. And part of the appeal of these kinds of narratives is often in the attempt to find a way to break free from the cycle of repetition. But the Sexy Brutale gives us the means to escape from the very beginning. Most games do not attempt the Groundhog Day type narrative, and that's because it can be difficult to build a gameplay experience out of something that continually resets. The most recent mainstream example of this type of game, at the time of writing, was Deathloop. However, thinking of games that do this is usually a short list, and that means that the Sexy Brutale, simply by virtue of the kind of narrative it is trying to tell, will have very few rivals. So, what is the Sexy Brutale? It is a murder mystery game in which you play as a character who is continually brought back to life until you have managed to solve a series of deaths in an elaborate masked ball. Each of these deaths can be solved by doing something with your ability to rewind time. So, while you cannot interact with any other people, because you're basically an anomaly here, you can interact with the world. That means that, for instance, if any of the guests dies by being shot, you can reset time, go to the weapon that is used, remove the bullets, and then watch as the would-be killer fails to execute their plan. You essentially foil the murder plans of the hosts of this masked ball, and whenever you manage to save someone, you progress to the next area. Eventually you come to understand the cause of the whole thing, as you would expect. The game is entertaining, fun, and relatively short. It also has a great art style that is quite unique. Everything about the game sets it apart from many other games out there. What is also very fascinating about the game is that it manages to stick the landing. That is one of the hardest parts about the Groundhog Day style narrative. How do you end it? It's the place many fumble and screw up. But the Sexy Brutale does not. So it is commendable how it succeeds in executing so many of the guests of the eponymous Sexy Brutale while also executing this narrative style. The game's narrative chops are commendable, but that isn't what I want to talk about today. In fact, to discuss the specifics of the narrative is to spoil much of the game. Instead, I want to speak about the narrative of exposure. This game did not get discussed all that much. At the time of writing this, it has about 2,500, user reviews on Steam. It is a good number for an indie, but for something so well made, it is comparatively unknown. This general lack of fanfare can be placed at the feet of many different things. If your company is not particularly famous, you may not, get picked up by mainstream journalists quite as readily. If your game does not manage to immediately strike a chord in its marketing, you'll probably not see much attention. If you make a game that is simply difficult to market because of how niche it is in what it does, you may find yourself struggling to find an audience. In addition to these issues, I would personally lay some of the blame for the Sexy Brutale's general lack of attention on the name of the game. Games have all manner of names. Those names do not always reflect what the game is about. The first Grand Theft Auto had that name because you could commit Grand Theft Auto. The Darkness has that name because you play as a character who has the darkness. And Portal has that name because you play with portals. Some are not as easy to simply classify. Based on name alone, you probably wouldn't be able to figure out what Dishonored, Soma, or Hades are as games. However, the Sexy Brutale has a bit of an issue in that its name has the word sexy in it alongside the word brutale. Now, I am personally far from having a puritanical mindset, and the word sexy means nothing to me. But what do we typically associate that word with? There are very few games, movies, or songs that will use that overt word. That is probably because we are more used to seeing that word attached to something pornographic, or at the very least, erotic. The name itself is a liability because it will cause some people to assume that the game is something very different. A game that has the word sexy in it will probably be a porn game. The big issue is also that the Sexy Brutale is named that because the location they are staying inside is called the Sexy Brutale. Which means that they could have used any name The word brutale, which means cruel and other similar words, would be a suitable name if attached to something other than sexy. The name could have been anything, but that particular combination of those precise words does not convey what the game is, and it serves as an off-putting name to those who will simply see a name and choose not to engage with it out of a sense of assumption that it has to do with sex. I love the Sexy Brutale. It is a great and highly original game, but the name is kind of pointless and damaging to marketing. A title does not need to reflect exactly what the piece of art is, but in this day and age, where marketing your products is so important, you cannot afford to choose a name that will turn people away. The narrative in the game cannot be appreciated when you have actively chosen a name that evokes a pornographic narrative. Just to put this in like another context, imagine a game about fishing, but you call it something like fascist fun. You may attract the wrong audience while pushing the right audience away. Just pay attention to what you name things, because a name means a lot more than some people realize.